Hello chess enthusiasts, my name is Miha and welcome to my chess realm YouTube channel. So Belgrade FIDE Grand Prix has recently ended. In the finals, Mitnia, Andreikin and Richard Rapport were playing. The first game ended up in a draw, so the second was the decisive. Let's see what happened. Richard Rapport had white pieces and he started with d4, d5, c4, e6, knight to c3 and now a6. And what do we have? We have queen's gambit decline, and this a6 is the so-called Janowski variation. And the idea is that black threatens with capturing on c4, later with b5, creating a very strong pawn check here on the queen side. So white more or less has no other option but to capture on d5. Now e-pawn recaptures, white plays a3, preventing this unpleasant bishop to b4. Black plays h6, preventing bishop to g5. And now white plays bishop to f4. Black develops knight to f6, e3. And now black is the first one who strikes the center with c5. And now a very interesting move, bishop goes to e5, targeting is one of the defenders of this pawn on d5. Well, let's see if black continues with the development. Then white simply captures, queen captures, d pawn captures on c5. This pawn is double attacking, it's going to be captured. So in the game, black plays bishop to e6, further reinforcing this pawn on d5. White continues with the development. Knight from g goes to e2, knight goes to c6, and knight goes to f4. Once this pawn on d4 is gone, white is going to put a lot of pressure on this pawn on d5. So black has decided to capture this pawn on d4. White can of course recapture with e-pawn, but if e-pawn recapture, black continues with the development after bishop to e6, double attack on this bishop on e5. So maybe this is not the best continuation. So in the game, white plays bishop to d4, still hoping that when this line is open, white will be able to attack this pawn on d5. And now black has decided to grab the bishop pair, so knight captures on d4, queen recaptures, and black plays bishop to d6. You can see that this pawn is 3 times attacked, twice defended. Well, white cannot grab immediately after, let's say, knight captures, then knight captures, bishop captures, queen of course have to capture, but then bishop to b4, we have discovered attack on the queen. So first white plays g3 naturally. White has a light square bishop, so all pawns should be on the dark square. It's better from strategically point of view. Black plays rook to c8, and now white plays rook goes to d1. Now queen on d file is protected, so trick from before doesn't work anymore, and black plays queen to a5, further reinforcing this pawn on d5 and also threatening with the bishop to a3. Let's see if white makes a random move, for example bishop to g2, bishop simply captures on a3, b pawn recaptures, and now black captures defenseless knight on c3. Of course white can capture, but then rook captures, black is a pawn up and is controlling c5, so this is definitely much better for black. So in the game, white plays rook to c1, further reinforcing this knight on c3. And now black has decided to castle king side, and white has decided to deprive the black from the bishop pair, so knight captures on e6, f pawn recaptures, and now bishop to h3, attacking pawn on e6. Now there are 2 ways of defending. One is of course rook to e8, defending pawn on e6, but black intends to double the rook along the c file, and if rook is going to be on 8, it won't be able to help on the c file. So in the game, black plays king to f7, defending pawn on e6, very interesting move. And now white also castles king side, black plays rook to c4, attacking the queen, queen goes back to d3, but before doubling the rooks along the c file, black plays bishop to e5, putting a lot of pressure here on this knight on c3. Well, let's see if white tries to drive this bishop away, then simply bishop captures on c3. Now b pawn has to protect this pawn on a3, so pawn on b2 cannot capture bishop. So after rook captures again, pawn on b file cannot capture. So after queen captures, pawn captures, then we have knight to e4 attacking this pawn on c3. Rook to c1 doesn't help. Then we have rook to c8, and this pawn is double attack, cannot be protected. So here black gains a pawn. It's only 1 pawn, but every pawn counts, so this is winning for black. So in the game, white plays knight to e2, removing knight from the c3. Now this pawn on b2 is not protected, but you have to keep in mind that also this rook on c4 is double attack. If, for example, black would try rook to c1, and then bishop to b3, white would simply play rook to b1. When this bishop be gone, white captures this pawn on b7 with check, and that would be very unpleasant for black. So in the game, black plays rook from f file goes to c8, doubling the rook along the c file, and now white has decided to trade some material. Rook captures on c4, rook recaptures, and now b4 attacking queen on a5. Now let's see what black can do. Queen can of course go to back to c7, but then knight to f4 is very unpleasant because then pawn on e6 is double attacked. Here black would have to capture this knight on f4, because if for example black tries to defend with a rook, bishop simply captured on e6. And even if rook recaptures, then queen to g6 check. If black still wants to hang on to his rook, after king to e7, queen g7, king d6, now queen captures queen, king recaptures, and knight to e6, and white is a whole exchange up with additional 2 pawns. This is winning for white. So I stated before, here black would have to capture knight on f4, but after e-pawn recapture, here white gets the open semi-open e file, preparing to harass this weak pawn on e6. Again, maybe not the best continuation for black. So in the game, black has decided to play queen to a4, preparing either queen to c6 or maybe queen to c2, trying to exchange the queens, and white immediately plays knight to f4, again double attack on this pawn on e6. Now, as stated before, this pawn cannot be successfully guarded, so black more or less has no other option but to capture this knight, so bishop captures on f4. Now white has 2 ways of recapture. Let's see, if g-pawn captures on f4, then black plays queen to c2, forcing the exchange of queens. After queen would capture queen, rook recaptures, black would definitely target this pawn on a3, rook to a1 doesn't help, then we have knight to e4 double attack on this pawn on f2, again very unpleasant. f3 doesn't help exactly. After that, knight to d2, trying to grab this pawn on f3, and if king goes to, let's say, somewhere on the second rank, then we already have this discover attack. Anyway, this is a very bad position for white, if not totally lost. So in the game, white plays e-pawn captures on f4. Now queen to c2 doesn't work, because if queen goes to c2, here white has additional square on e3, targeting this pawn on e6. Rook to 6 wouldn't help exactly. Then again, queen can go to a7, harass defenseless pawn on b7. Again, white has a lot of opportunities here. So in the game, black plays queen goes back to c6. And now white plays queen to e3, targeting this pawn on e6. Black immediately interferes with knight to e4, interfering this e file. Now this knight on e4 has a very strong outpost here, so white definitely want to drive it away. f3 was played, attacking knight on f6. Well, if knight goes back to f6, then we have rook to e1. This pawn on e6 is 3 times attacked, 2 times defended, and here black loses a pawn. So in the game, black first plays intermediate move, or Zwischenzug, rook goes to c3, attacking the queen. Well, white has to be careful. If queen goes, for example, to e2, then we have queen to b6 check. After king goes, let's say, to h1. Now black can play rook to e3, because rook is now protected. After maybe queen to c2. Now black can remove the knight back to c6, and black has a free pawn on a d file, which would cause a lot of problems. So in the game, white plays queen to d4. And now black further harasses white king. Rook to c4 was played, queen goes back to e3, rook goes back to c3, queen goes back to d4, rook goes back to c4, and now all white needed to do was to play queen to e3. There would have been a threefold repetition, and therefore gaining a draw. But white is not here to gain a draw. In the game, white plays queen to e5, preparing this f5, and you have to keep in mind this knight on e4 is still under attack. Knight could go back, of course, to e6, but like I said, rook to e1, again, very unpleasant. Now in the game, black plays knight goes to d2, attacking rook on f1. Well, let's see, if rook goes somewhere along this d file, let's say rook to d1, we have knight to f3, forking both king and the queen. If, for example, white plays rook to f2, still protecting this pawn on f3, then black simply plays rook to c1 check. Now white cannot play rook to f1 because this square is protected twice. So after king to g2, then we would have knight to c4, attacking the queen, and here white would have to be careful. Of course, after queen to b8, believe it or not, it's knight to e3 with checkmate. So white would have to play queen to d4, still protecting this e3 square, but then another stunning move would probably follow rook to d1, attacking the queen. Of course, if queen captures, we have knight to e3, again forking both pieces. And after the only move, queen to a7, black would probably play d4, blocking queen on this diagonal, again threatening with knight to E3 with checkmate, very unpleasant. Bishop to G4 wouldn't exactly help. After that, G6 threatened with H5. This is very bad, if not totally lost for white. So in the game, white has found the correct move. F5 was played, preparing this check here on E6. And black, of course, captures this rook on F1. Well, let's see. White cannot simply recapture with king, because then we have rook to C1 check, after king to E2, queen to C2 check, king to E3, rook to E1, and there goes our queen. But even if white would play king to F2 after queen to C2 check, queen to E2 defending, black simply captures this pawn on F5. Even if there is a trade of queens, black is in exchange out with the pass D pawn. This is again much better for black. So white doesn't capture this knight. In the game, white captures pawn on E6, so we have check. Well, king has, let's say, a lot of squares where he can go. The worst is, of course, if king goes to G6, then we have queen to F5 with checkmate. If king goes, for example, let's say to G8, then we have E7 threatening with the promotion on the next move. King to F7 doesn't help. White simply promotes to queen. Now black would have no other option but to recapture with queen. After that, queen to D5 double attack on king and the rook. After maybe king to F7, we have queen to C4 threatening to gain this knight. Of course, knight can go to E3, it's protected, but after queen to C5 again double attack on king and the knight, black can only defend with the queen, but after that bishop to C8, when the rooks are traded here, white is going to start eating pawns on the queen side. So again, this is a winning for white. So in the game, black was probably calculating between king to E7 and king to E8. Well, the correct continuation here, but that's not easy to find, was to play king to E7. Black was probably afraid of this queen to G7 check, but here black would hide his king on the D6 square, and now let's see. White could, of course, play E7, threatening to promote this E pawn, but after queen to B6, white is forced to capture this knight, and after queen to E3 here, black creates a mating net. If white promotes to queen, doesn't help, because after that we will have rook to C1 check, king can only go to G1, and rook to G1 checkmate. So here in this position, white would have to promote pawn to a knight, because after that black king would be in check, and here black would have to capture this knight, because if king would go, for example, to C6, then queen to C7 check, king can only go to B5, and after bishop to D7, black can only defend with a rook to C6, then after that queen to B7 check, king maybe, let's say, to I don't know, A4, then queen captures on C6, if queen captures on A3, queen to A6 check, and after maybe king to BT, queen to E2, forcing the exchange of queens, and white is winning. So like I said, black here should have captured this knight on E6 after queen to E8. Well, white would have to find a very strong move, bishop to F5. Now creating mating net with queen to E3 doesn't work anymore, because then we have queen to D7 check. The only move for king is E5. After queen to E6, the only move is on D5, and after queen to B6, now king has to abandon his queen. After king to E5, now here white simply captures the queen. So here in this position, not easy to analyze. Computer says it's slightly better for black. Black will definitely have to protect this pawn here on h-file. Black king here in the open. One thing is what the computer says, and the other what the players would actually play in the game. Definitely here black would have much greater chances of winning the game or securing a draw. Okay, so let's go back to our game. Black didn't play king to e7. Instead, black makes a fatal blunder. King to e8 was played. And now white plays queen to g7, therefore confining black king on the last rank. Black continues with queen to b6 check. King captures now knight on f1, and now we have rook to c1 check. King goes to e2. Check on e3 is no longer possible. Black will soon run out of the meaningful checks. Well, black here maybe should have tried with rook to c7, counteracting on the 7th rook against the queen. Well, even here for white it would not be easy to devise a winning plan, but the correct continuation would be queen to g6 check. Now black king has, let's say, two options. If king would go to d8, then queen to f6, and this is losing. After king to c8, queen to f8, checkmate. And if king goes to e8, we have bishop to f5, threatening bishop to g6, gaining decisive material advantage. So here in this position, black would have to play king to e7. After queen to f7, king goes to d6, and after queen to, let's say, f4, king maybe to c6. Well, let's see, white would probably capture pawn on h6. Black has rook, white has bishop, but white has additional three passed pawns actually, so it's not easy to analyze this position. Actually, computer says it's better for white, but like I said, one thing is what computer says and what actually would be played in the game, but definitely here black would have a greater chances of securing a draw. In the game, black indeed tried to secure the draw, but he tried to do it via perpetual check, so rook goes to e1 check. King has no other option but to capture rook, and now queen to e3 check. Now white king has two options, either f1 or d1. Let's see, if king goes to f1, that would be a mistake, because after queen to c1, white king cannot escape check. Let's see, after king goes to e2, queen to c2, king to e3, queen to c1, and now this e4 square is protected, as well as white cannot go to f4. And after king to d4, you have queen to b2, skewering queen, so skewering king, gaining a queen. But even after king to e3, then you have queen to d1 again. If king goes to c3, queen to a1 again, skewering king, and again king cannot go to c3, king can only go back, and then the checks will continue and the game would ended up in a draw. So in the game, white finds the correct continuation. King to d1 was played. Now queen to d3 check, king to c1, queen to e3 check, and now queen to b2. White has a simple plan. King should go to a2, and later queen to b2, somehow fortifying his king. But after queen to d3 check, white first plays king to c1, queen to e3, and now king goes to b2. Black continues with check, so queen to d2 check, king to a1, and now queen to c1 check. Now white finally played this king to a2, preparing to place the queen on the b2. Well, if black tries with queen to c2, of course, queen to b2 check, and after queen to c4, king goes to c1, and there are more many meaningful checks because now this f1 square is protected by the bishop. So in the game, black plays queen to c4 immediately. Now white king goes to b2, preventing this queen to b3 check. Queen goes to e1 check, and now white plays king to a1. Of course, black would continue with check, but after queen to d1, white would play king to a2, and then the queen would join the game on the b2 square. Black might have very well resigned this position, but here black plays the last move, a very interesting move, queen to f1 check. Of course, you can see this f1 square is protected, but if you recall what happened on the 31st move, here in this position, black captured rook on f1, so f1 square was the most important square in the whole game. So this is what was black trying to say with this move. This was sort of a joke move, as it was pointed out by the commentators. Of course, in this position, bishop captures on f1, and in this position, Dmitry Andreikin resigned the game, and Richard Rapport became the winner of the Belgrade FIDE Grand Prix tournament. So I hope you like this game, I hope you have learned something from it. If you have any questions, my email is below in the description. Of course, I invite you to visit my Instagram page. That's it for now, and see you soon.